Hi, Lindsay. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Super good. I'm so happy that we're here. We found the time between the two of our schedules to be able to chat tonight. I wanted to introduce everybody to Lindsey Griffin. If you don't already know who she is, I have been I've been watching you on the internet. No, not really. I'm not much of a lurker, but you definitely come across my timeline quite often. I have noticed how bold you are, how self-assured you are. I love that you are so authentic and raw, and you post from the heart. And I've also noticed more recently. So I think I would have only kind of started seeing your posts and your husband, Sean Griffin's ministry, Kingdom in Context. For those who don't know it, now you'll know it and you'll be happy that you went to check it out. Probably just before your son was born, but actually maybe not even. I'm not sure. I might have come on this path even after if he's not even 2 years. Yeah, I don't think. But all that to say is that I feel a softness to a lot of your posts now. I feel and you can definitely we're going to go through your testimony today so you can definitely see if I picked up on this or if you even noticed it in yourself of becoming a mom, like a softness that comes and like I feel like you're trying to bring people back to Jesus. Like there's this whole wild and wacky Torah world out there and you guys are responsible for uh, fostering and teaching a lot of the people who are out there because I mean you can tell us in a moment how big the ministry is. I'm not even sure how many tens of thousands of people follow you guys on various channels. Anyway, I'm loving and appreciating a softness in your posts these days because it's so badly needed. I'm just new on this Torah scene, and as I was saying a moment ago, sometimes I just want to run away while I'm ahead because it's so brutal. So anyway, I just super glad to be talking to you, and I want to hear Lindsey Griffin, the real human behind these, snarky, you're funny and sarcastic sometimes, and I want to know the real human behind Lindsey and your path, especially when it comes to your walk in the faith and everything that you've gone through over the last year. So thank you very, very much for being here.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And as I was telling you before we started recording, it has been a very long time since I've shared my testimony. So I'm sure the Lord will bring things back to my remembrance. But yeah, if I'm hoping that I can be edifying to anyone listening. Hoping I'll have the words that people need to hear.
So could you get us started with kind of yeah, I mean just filling in the gaps of what I don't know or what I missed in terms of where you guys are at as a ministry, some information about Kingdom and Context, because that's where you're at now in 2024, but I mean that obviously wasn't always the case. I don't even know where you were on your walk when you met Sean. We had an exchange the other day, something about being a terrorist for only 6 months before you met him. So I think you were already on this path. So yeah,
Mhm.
just start us off with where you guys are kind of right now. I see your son in the background there in the picture, who I think you said is 19 months, and
Yeah, that's Levi. Um, so Sean and I have been together for around 8 years, married for 7. And yeah, Kingdom in Context is, I would say it's my husband's ministry. He's the teacher. He's the one that I feel has the gifting and the authority, and definitely the understanding and knowledge to teach. But I am part of the ministry, obviously. I think we've got like 149,000 subs on YouTube. I'm not sure. I haven't checked in a while. Which yeah, that's great. It's wonderful. I don't know how many of those 149,000 actually watch the content. I mean, if you know how YouTube is, that sub count doesn't necessarily mean a whole lot in terms of who's actually getting notified that you've got videos. So yeah, we started the ministry about 7 years ago, a little after we got married. We were just doing a lot of debating with people on Facebook, and we were in some groups that were started based on something that Rob Skiba was doing. Do you know who Rob Skiba was?
yeah,
Um,
I learned about
based,
him not that long ago, and when I did, I was like, I can't believe I never heard this guy. It's brilliant.
Yeah, honestly, sometimes I still can't believe that he has passed away. It seems so surreal, but he had a virtual house church show that he would do on Shabbat. And so a Facebook group was started for it. And of course, all kinds of Torah people are, hanging out in that Facebook group. And I had first noticed Sean in there, some of the posts he was making. And I was really attracted to his knowledge of scripture. And yeah, once we got together, he moved out to Colorado from Oklahoma. And it was probably within about 8 to 9 months that he started the channel because he was always typing out these super long comments explaining things to people. And I'd be like, if you just would, me in my naive days, would be like, if you would just make a video, then you could link that and people will watch it and they'll hear your explanation. You won't have to type these long comments anymore. Little did I know, very few people will go just watch the video. And even if they do, a lot of people have decided they disagree with you before they even hear you out. So they're just in there to disagree in your comments and all that. But that was how we came up with the idea to start the ministry. And over time, it's just grown to a point of support where I was able to become a stay at home wife, now mother. And Sean does this full time plus some other things that he does, like he's got the tea company, he's selling tea, he's been working on a contextual study guide of scripture, and he actually has the standalone book of Enoch study guide separated by itself, so he sells that on Amazon. So there's other things that he does besides just this, but most of it's related to Kingdom Context, the Bible, teaching. Right now, he's been doing a class on his Patreon for people if they want more specialized type teaching. So yeah, he's been really busy with that, and I've become a mom. I'm in my toddler days right now, and growing into that role. So yeah, that's
Wow,
where we're at with the ministry.
perfect. Thank you. So you said that Levi's 19 months?
Yeah, almost 20 months old.
Great. So when you guys first got together, you noticed him. I know that feeling of noticing a guy online and seeing how smart slash nerdy they are. I don't know if Sean is, yeah, Sean's obviously
Oh
a
yes.
Bible. And then like, yeah, I think you know, and I've told this story a few times on in videos that is a very similar story to how Jesse and I met, and it was in your group, Kingdom in Context, or Kingdom Crew.
Kingdom Crew.
So I'll be forever grateful. I love telling that story, and I still have in the back of my head, you guys should have some kind of dating service, 'cause it's such a weird niche thing, and of course it's your life, like my timeline was so strange and quick, and things just unraveled to me very quickly. Just kind of before I met Jesse, I was dabbling in this, but I was still going to church. Like I kind of could have ended up in a different direction with a different kind of man who also knew about scripture from a different point of view. I guess just to
Yeah.
say it is such a niche thing, but then when it is your life, like of course all of Sean's work is surrounding this because there's nothing else when it's your life. You can't be a part-time. You can't do any of it part-time. It takes everything over. It's how you live your life. It's not just going to a building one day once a week and listening
Right.
to somebody talk and coming back home. So um, yeah, so where were you? Were you raised? I think you were not actually raised Christian. I don't know where you were raised. I'd be curious to know like a little bit about your upbringing, where you were and how that led you, I guess, similar to me to the New Age. However
Yeah,
many
so
you're going to fill in there, I'll let you run with it.
yeah, I can start in the beginning. So my dad came from a very devout Christian family, and he was someone who always was blessed with the gift of faith. Honestly, he didn't go through a time in his life where he didn't believe in God and Jesus. So it just for him was just a self-evident truth. My mother came from not a Christian background. She came from a kind of Catholic background. I would say that my my grandmother on my mom's side is kind of a just in case Catholic. Like she doesn't go to mass, she doesn't do communion. She's I would say the last 50 years of her life, her religion has really been the Democratic Party, as weird as that might sound. But, politics can become a religion for some people. But she's going to have a Catholic funeral and have her last rites done. So she's, make sure she gets in. So that's kind of the background that my mom came from. And my grandfather on that side, I don't, I would call him a just in case Christian too, but he was the type that maybe would get baptized once in a while just in case he died. Otherwise, he was not a great person. So my mom came from this real abusive, broken background. And so her spirituality was a weird mix of things where she had a dream about Jesus when she was 16. And ever since then, I think that kind of gave her this idea that she knew him and she had a relationship with him. And it didn't matter how she lived her life or if the Bible was true, or she kind of had this weird mix of things where she was into psychic stuff. Like she watched a lot of that John Edwards guy crossing over.
Oh,
Super intense.
I totally forgot about that until exactly.
Oh,
Oh my goodness.
oh, and Sylvia Brown. Don't get me started on Montel Williams and Sylvia Brown. I mean, oh my gosh, because she thought that she had psychic abilities and she felt persecuted for her whole life, and that, oh, the Christians are evil because they think I don't have this gift. And, so she was kind of, I would say that she wore the spiritual pants in the relationship with my dad. So my dad would have these moments where he would want to teach us Christianity, but he didn't know how to gently guide us and train us up in the way we should go. So he was kind of more like, you go to church and you believe because I tell you to believe. It's not this gentle guidance into, an understanding that I have to have my own experience with this. I have to have my own relationship. I have to have my own gift of faith and belief. You can't just force me to believe. So that was kind of the mixture of spirituality and religion that I had in my life. It was the Christianity was very sporadic. My dad, in the first part of their marriage, for a few years, my dad was trying to take us to church as a family. But my dad's family went through some real niche phases themselves through the 90s. And so they were like starting their own church in different places. And then they would have doctrinal problems and then they'd split off to start a different church. And a lot of it, my grandpa, bless his heart, he went through a lot of different phases. I mean, he went through a Pentecostal hellfire and brimstone phase for a while. And that was the time we were going to his church. And so us kids kind of got scared. We would go to church and our grandfather would be up, screaming at the pulpit, about hell and fire and brimstone. And my mom had brought us coloring books to like lay under the pews and color while church service is going on. And, and I was baptized for the first time in that church when I was like 7 years old. And I don't remember asking to be baptized. I don't remember why I was baptized. But I remember it feeling scary. Like they put me in jeans, commando, and that was the first time I had ever been commando. And it like felt strange as a child. I was like uncomfortable. And then I was like taken to this tub in front of the congregation. My papa like dumped me into the water and I popped up and people clapped. And like, I just have these real hazy memories of that feeling weird and scary and uncomfortable. I didn't understand it. So that was kind of how my family was on both sides. So my dad's side was super Christian, and I ended up kind of being alienated by my mom from that side of the family, where I look back now and I wish that hadn't happened, because I feel like it would have been good for me to have. I look back now and I know they were really good-hearted Christians and they loved the Lord and they were good Christ-like people. And I feel like if I had had more influence from Christians like that in my life, my idea of Christianity and the Bible probably wouldn't have been so warped and so bitter and angry, because my mom had a lot of bitterness and anger towards specifically Christianity and the Bible. She didn't feel that way about other religions.
People don't though, right? That's the one. That's the one. I
Yeah.
was talking to a friend the other day, one of my only non-believing friends. I don't have very many friends left in real life, but he's somebody
Mhm.
who stuck with me this whole, all of these crazy transitions I've been through in the last few years. And he said to me the other day, he said, I've checked out. I mean, he was a yoga teacher. He read the Quran. He looked in all of these. He said, but he said, the Bible is really the only thing I haven't read. And I said, well, that's on purpose. That's because you
Yeah.
grew up in a place that told you that it was evil because the church did X, Y, and Z. That's how it works.
Yep.
Check out
Yeah.
everything except for the Bible.
Yeah. I can remember times when I was a kid where I would try to say prayers to God in my bed at night, but I just didn't feel that connection. I remember one time I asked God to show me a sign that he was real and play, and that sign was that my favorite song would be playing on the radio. And I turned the radio on, and it was my favorite song was playing, but it was Aerosmith at the time of what movie did they do that song for?
Armageddon.
Oh, that yes, the song for Armageddon. So that was on like every third song on the radio at that time. But here I am, like 9 or 10 years old or something, like, oh, but that was like that was all that I was really I didn't have anyone guiding me on how to pray or telling me, you don't have to ask God to approve in that way too, like there's other ways we can handle this, honey. I didn't have anyone give me that guidance, so I was trying to seek it on my own. And when I was 12 years old, the turning point for me with beliefs was when I was 12 years old. I went to the library and I got a book called Dancing Shadows. And I found out many, many years later that this book was like the person who wrote the book, it was like totally plagiarized. It was a total crock of crap. Like it was a whole bunch of bad misinformation, like the same kind of information that they use for the Zeitgeist documentaries. But I read that book, and it was a book that was basically attacking Christianity and how Christianity stole all these things from paganism, and that Wicca is the true religion. And I just got it in my head that I wanted to be a Wiccan. I wanted to be a witch. And it was a year or two later, my grandma on my mom's side, not my grandma on my dad's side, bought me a book called Teen Witch by Silver Ravenwolf, who is like this huge author in the Wiccan. I don't know if she's popular anymore, but back then she was like the author in the Wiccan crowd. And my parents initially like freaked out, including my mom, and took the book away from me. And then they gave it back. I can't remember why they gave it back. Probably because my mom probably berated my dad about it and told him, we have to let her explore. We have to let her choose. Who knows? But they gave it back to me. And so that was where I really started my journey down in, the path into New Age stuff, Wicca, Eastern religions.
Well, sorry, it's gonna keep happening because I keep getting glimpses of myself at a similar age in a similar way. And I don't often talk about how I was attracted to Wicca, but it was very, do you remember the movie The Craft?
Yes. Oh,
So
yeah.
when that came out, my girlfriends and I thought we were witches, and we tried to do all these, light as a feather, stiff as a board things together, and like the allure of like, and we were all at Catholic school at that time, and the allure of like being able to control and to just have the power to do it on
Yeah.
your own. Whereas when we come to this path, for me, it was like, between witchcraft stuff or manifesting, the secret, what are they? I don't even remember what these terms are
The
anymore.
law of attraction.
Law of attraction, now we don't have to do anything. He's got it.
Yeah. 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 The pressure's off. Yeah. So jumping back into, I guess I'll just move into where I went next. Okay.
Yeah, so
Um,
you were saying that which you kind of you that's what the new age is, right? It's
yeah,
like let's just take all these things from all these places, and witchcraft has nothing to do with yoga, but let's just put them together.
right. Yeah. I used to tell people that I enjoyed a buffet of religions and I just took what I liked from each religion. And I learned that that is actually theosophy, this whole new age thing. It is a newer belief set, and it is a conglomeration of a bunch of different belief sets that does go back to Helena Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society and Alice Bailey and all them. So yes, I got into the new age. I started doing spells at home, and it absolutely had to do with, feeling like I had some kind of control in the world, because I was living in a very chaotic environment. We had lots of foster children. We were already kind of like in poverty, just like on the poverty line ourselves. And then my mom had her issues that, gave her this savior complex. And she was just bringing in all these troubled teens into our house, so there'd be like 11 kids in our house at times. And it was hard to get attention and to feel in control over something. And I was definitely one of those quiet, sad girls at school that either I got picked on or people just didn't really notice me. It was like one or the other. It was never a happy medium, or never like, I was never one of the popular girls. But yeah, I just was kind of invisible. I was that kind of girl. So starting to get into my teenage years, I started with the Wicca stuff, love spells and all that kind of stuff. And I got into some real deep depression issues. And I had a friend who started harming herself. And then that gave me the idea to give it a try. And then that became something that I feel that that's a form of demonic oppression that becomes an addiction for some people. And that was something that I struggled with all the way into my 20s, actually. And then about halfway through high school, I was 15 or 16, my parents decided we were going to pick up and move to Colorado from Ohio. So my whole life was ripped away. Like all the kids I went to elementary school with, the kids I was getting ready to graduate with, you know, I was just moved away from my home, everything I knew. And Colorado was a whole different world. Fort Collins is a very large city compared to where I came from. And so I came from a place where there was like 800 kids in the high school, and that seemed like a lot of kids. And Fort Collins is like got 4 high schools, and there's like 2,500 kids in each school. Nobody even knew I was new, which actually was nice. I guess I can say people didn't realize I was the new kid because nobody really knew each other coming into the high schools. But so I had a big transition in my life at that point. And when we moved out here, I kind of settled in with a group of stoner friends. Stoner intellectuals was the kind that we were, smoke pot and rap freestyles and make art and have, elevated conversations. And
Rapping freestyle, that would be awesome. You have no vintage videotapes of
no, I wasn't the one rapping. I could do poetry. I was a poet, but I could not just flow. In fact, I made a post about my old best friend a while ago. I've talked about her a few times and asked for prayer for her, but she was the one. She had this beautiful gift, actually, of freestyle. But yeah, I mean, we weren't the potheads that like got stoned and just ate pizza and played video games. Like we were, out in the mountains, doing things. So I kind of settled in with a group of friends out here that were also, that no Christians, no one of the faith. So I kind of just continued on my path. I got a little kind of moved away from the Wicca stuff and got more into the Eastern religions stuff, Hinduism, Buddhism, meditation, yoga, all that kind of stuff. I was introduced to the great stupa of Dharmakaya, is built up in Red Feather Lakes in Colorado. And it's like a world famous Buddhist temple. And I actually, I had some friends take me up there when I was like 17. And we walked in on this meditation class and they allowed us to join. And it was like this amazing experience of seeing this beautiful building. And the silence in this temple was deafening. And I know that might sound weird to some people. How can something silent be deafening? But once you experience it, you know what I mean? Like you could hear the silence in this place. It was beautiful. And so it kind of just solidified for me, the way that my heart was wanting to go. I felt peace up there. Um, by that time, my parents were divorcing. My dad was very hostile to he and later in my life when I became a teenager is when my dad had this kind of revival of his faith after we moved to Colorado. I feel like he kind of lost his identity a little bit when we moved away because he had lived in that town his whole life, and his family was very well known in that town, so everybody knew my dad. So when we came out to this place where nobody knew him, nobody cared who he wasn't important. I think he had a bit of a crisis, and then me and my older sister and my younger sister kind of all hit our teens almost all at once. And so my poor father has got three teenage girls. We were pretty much out of control in terms of, we had boyfriends that he didn't want us sleeping over with, and, going to parties and things that my mom was letting us do things that he didn't agree with. And so he kind of started having this meltdown, and he and I had started having a lot more fights about religion specifically. And I was coming home from school trying to argue with him about evolution and, whale skeletons found with knee bones and, just stuff that I know now is like so ridiculous. But my poor dad, he wasn't ready with an answer. He didn't go watch Kent Hovind debates and figure out how to, counter this.
Actually, you actually believed what the teachers were saying, or it was just a way that you could dig at him because
Oh no, I was fully indoctrinated in public school. I completely believed in evolution. I never was a full-blown atheist, but I definitely never believed in the God of the Bible. And the things that I was taught at school were just things that kind of inspired me to go home and argue with my dad about his faith. And unfortunately for him, he couldn't really defend his faith very well. He didn't know the Bible very well. He didn't know biblical archaeology. All these things I ended up learning when I became a Christian that support the Bible. My dad was not equipped with that information. So it just pushed me further and further. Because then, as him and my mom were divorcing, I started to develop this really unhealthy codependent relationship with her because I felt this need to protect her in the divorce, just all that stuff that happens when parents split up like that and young adult children are involved. So yeah, they divorced. I had moved out and was living with my mom, and I was just on my path of, new age spirituality. I mean, I never became super devoted to any one particular discipline. I just read a lot of Hindu Vedas and Buddhist scriptures. I met a guy online many years ago who was a Muslim from Tunisia, and we had an online relationship for a few years. And so I read the Quran with him. I basically would read any kind of religious text except for the Bible. But when I went around arguing with people about the Bible, funny enough, I always acted like I read it. Like, as an unbeliever, I had no shame in just being a complete liar about, oh, yeah, I've read that and it's not real. It's not true. I would walk around being like, I've read the Bible and the Torah. Like,
red flag.
And here's the scary part. No Christian ever corrected me on that. And no Christian ever noticed that. Okay. So that's a problem I noticed when I became a Christian. Like, whoa, nobody ever caught I was so clearly full of crap.
Really fact check. That was not difficult to come out.
No, that is not difficult to fact. You didn't need Google back then for that one. So really what I started to really deal with in my 20s was more alcoholism, addiction to pills, severe depression. I started having epileptic seizures when I was 18, and the drinking did not help that condition. And I went through a few years where I was having all kinds of grand mal seizures at the place that I worked, and spent a few stints in the hospital. Just went through a really low time. I never really got taught any life skills. So when that time to move out of the house and start a life came, I had no idea what I was doing. And I was attracting all the wrong people into my life. So, I'm basically, slid through my 20s working menial jobs, trying to rent cheap rooms out of people's houses. I never had my own apartment, never had my own place like that. I guess you could say I was in a state of arrested development, like I just was stuck in this immaturity. And all the while I had my, different spiritual practices. I did yoga, I did meditation. Eventually I got into channeling, but that came after some traumatic stuff in my life. Basically, there was like this turning point in my life. Uh, I had a real bad mental breakdown and ended up in checking myself into a mental institution. And I met a guy in there who was a member of NA. And he and I both got released from that place on the same day. And so he took me to my first NA meeting. And so that was the first step in my life of like coming out of just the fog and darkness of alcoholism and binge drinking. It was really, I had a problem with binge drinking and started going to NA. And I think that's probably where God started planting seeds in my heart, because it is a spiritual program and they do encourage you to find a higher power. Now, they are also very anti-Christ. They are very they like to say they're not a religion and they're not a cult, but boy, howdy, if you step out of line, you get treated like you left the cult. Okay. So, but it was what I needed at the time in my life. It got me clean. I started working a program, working with sponsors, connecting with other women in my community, having a little kind of family of my own. Because at that point, my dad had moved away and I really only had my mom and my little sister and my little brother around. And my little brother and my little sister have had their issues to where there's a lot of estrangement in my family. My mom's side of the family has this legacy of estrangement where at any given time, one of the aunts is fighting with the mom, or the aunts are all fighting with my uncle, or they're all angry at my grandma, or, and so that legacy was kind of passed down to me and my siblings. So I'd be in and out of relationships with my sister and my brother. So I kind of was my own little island, and NA became, this little haven for me. But it also was a dangerous place that dangerous people come to that I didn't realize. I didn't know what a sociopath was. Let's just put it that way. Okay. I didn't understand that you can meet a person who can be just charming as all get out and charismatic and make you fall in love with them, and they're actually a wicked, evil person on the inside who's just using you. So basically what happened after a few years of being in NA, I met a guy there named Casey, and he's kind of this, I only tell the story about him because I feel like the level of darkness that he brought me into is truly the catalyst that took me to the place of eventually coming to the Lord. So it may seem irrelevant or random, but I kind of have to tell some of the story. So it's a long story. I'm going to try to summarize it as well as I can. I've tried to put a lot of the memories of this story out of my mind for a very long time. So I'm also going to try not to get emotional about it, but it was a really hard time in my life. Basically, I met this guy. He was covered in prison tattoos. Okay. So there's my first mistake, is thinking to myself, he literally walked into the room and he had this big tattoo on his throat. And I thought, oh, don't talk to the guy with the neck tattoo. That was my first thought when I saw him. And I should have listened to that thought because he came in and he ended up sharing. He was one of those people that would like command the meeting. Like once he started sharing, he said all these amazing, profound things about recovery. And I was like sold. I was just sold. I was like, oh my gosh, he's working the program. He's serious. He's, if I had known the word repentant back then, he's repentant. Like I thought, this guy was back on the straight and narrow. So I started dating him. It turned out he had like a 15-year history in the prison system. He wasn't just a guy that, was in desperate times and held up a store one time and did a few years. Like he had a 15-year history at that point in his life, and he was only 20 something, 28 maybe. It's, been going on since he was juvenile. So I was not going to judge. I was going to be tolerant. I was going to look past his past. And so basically, it was the textbook story of love bombing, told me everything I wanted to hear, convinced me to quit my job that I was working. I moved in with my sister because her husband at the time had blown up his hand with a firework on New Year's Eve, and she had to go back to work, and they had 3 kids and she needed help around the house. So me and my brother both moved into the house with her, and my brother was giving her all his paychecks, and I was like cleaning and cooking 24/7. And Casey was supposed to come live with us, and he came and he stayed for like 2 nights, and he ended up disappearing one day. And I found out from his mom that this was his pattern. He goes to prison for a few years, he gets out, he's good for a few months, and then he absconds from parole, and he goes back into, he was dealing drugs and running guns and all kinds of stuff down in Denver. So he disappeared after making all these promises to me. And this was at a point in my life where I had had increasingly horrible relationships. Like I was increasingly choosing worse and worse guys. And I had just been living this life of working really hard and never having anything to show for it, like in terms of working a full 40-hour week and only being able to rent a room somewhere. And that feminine side of me, that side of me that's programmed to actually desire to be a stay-at-home wife and mother, was starting to come out, and I was starting to feel that. So when he came around and started making these promises that, he makes all this money, and, he's going to pay my rent, and, it's going to be the traditional gender roles, and, you can finally stop working, and, I love you enough to do this. And like, he made all those promises to me. So when he disappeared, it was like this scary thing. But I would say that I had some kind of Stockholm syndrome going on. Like I was totally brainwashed by him, believing, when he would call me and tell me he'd be back, he was not coming back. But he did end up coming to get me after Valentine's Day. He picked me up and took me down to Denver from Fort Collins. And I ended up getting stuck down there with him for like a week. The car that he had kept breaking down. We were staying in increasingly scary hotels. I didn't know that the whole time I was down there with him, he was shooting up meth and selling meth and had a loaded weapon with him. Well, I ended up finding out about the weapon, but he was down there committing all this criminal activity, and he'd like leave me in places while I'd go do these things. He also was seeing another girl while I was down there. So he was leaving me in one place, going and being with her, and then coming back with me and picking me up. He was printing counterfeit money and buying drugs with this counterfeit money. So then there ended up being like serious thugs after him while we were down. So then he's like trying to hide from these people that want to kill him. By the end of the week, the car that we had been driving in had finally broke down, and we were outside of his friend's house, and the snow started falling, and he started freaking out and talking about how bad he wanted to punch me. And I was like, he hadn't switched his flip on me like that until that point, where I saw the real crazy come out in terms of, like, I thought he was going to start getting violent with me. And in the course of the week that we were down there, he also had sexually assaulted me 3 different times. And it got worse each time. But each time I had this psychological thing going on in my mind where I was like rationalizing what was happening. And when my sister and my brother were calling me to see when I was going to come home, because I was like, I had made these commitments to them to be there helping at the household there. I couldn't actually tell them what was going on because I was on his phone. He was with me the whole time. I couldn't actually tell them what was going on because he was like dealing with all these weird, I was just terrified. I didn't quite know the magnitude of everything that was happening down there. And then these sexual assaults happened, and they like completely messed with my head. And by that final night that we were there, he started freaking out on me in the car and screaming about how now he's going to have to go hold up a gas station so that he can get money to get the car fixed. And I'm going to have to sit in the car and be his getaway driver and get the car to start so I can drive him away while he knocks off a liquor store or something. And so I'm starting to freak out in my mind about, oh my God, what am I going to do? And out of the blue, I had a friend who lived down in the Denver area, this guy named Derek, and he'd been my best friend for many years. And he just randomly out of the blue texted me and said, "Are you okay?" It was like 10:30 at night. I'm like, "No, I'm not okay. I need a ride back to Fort Collins." And by this time, Casey, when Derek came to pick me up, Casey didn't care. I was just a burden on him down there. He had only brought me down there to try and keep up the facade of our relationship that was never a relationship to begin with. Like, if you see those story times on YouTube and TikTok where people talk about this whole relationship they had with a man and they were thinking all these things they thought were reality and it was all a lie, that is what I experienced with some extreme violence on top of it. So my friend Derek picked me up and drove me home in the middle of the night. And that night I got to my sister's house and Casey called me to apologize. And so I went through the cycle with him for a little while. For a couple more months, he was still dangling the carrot of him coming back. And it was about 2 months after all of that. I was staying at a friend's house, crashing. I didn't have a place to live. I can't remember. Oh, yeah. I had this whole falling out with my sister at her house and she threw me out. So I had nowhere to go. I had given up the room I was renting. So I ended up at a friend's house watching her house for her while she was at rehab, a friend from NA. And I was drunk one night and I called an ex-boyfriend and asked him to come over. And he came over and, we were getting romantic and he realized, he's like, something is not right with you. Have you been drinking? And because he knew that I had been in NA, that I had been trying to be clean. And I was like, yeah, but don't worry, yeah, who cares? And he stopped me dead in my tracks and was like, something is wrong with you. What happened to you? And that was the first time that I spoke the words that Casey had raped me. I was like, and my ex, bless his heart, he was the right person to call that night. He was like, we are not, look, I will stay here with you and comfort you, but you need to go get help. I'm not going to be romantic with you. You need to get help. And so that was when I realized, like, oh my gosh, like all this stuff happened to me while I was down there and I hadn't been processing it. I had just turned back to alcohol to try and just numb all the pain and delusion of everything that was happening. So I did eventually go to the police and try to report that. Once they finally got him back in prison after he had absconded. So I went and reported it because I wasn't afraid of him coming to find me anymore because he had threatened me. He had done a veiled threat when I told him that I had realized, hey, you raped me like 3 times while I was down there and that's not right. And he threatened me that if I decided to do anything about that, I would rue the day. So once they caught him, I went, made the report. Nothing came of it because it was like 2 months after everything happened. I had no proof. They couldn't adjudicate that in court, and that was devastating for me, but I kind of knew. But I felt like I wanted it on the record because he was going to do it to someone else. This guy's a habitual criminal. He is not a normal person. But one of the things that I learned about him while we were together was that he was a Crowley Satanist. And I didn't really know what that meant back then. I didn't know. If I had known then, even if I hadn't been a Christian, I probably would have stayed away from him because that's like the depths of the worst kind of Satanism if you're following Crowley. And he told me that a lot of men, when they go to prison and when they're habitual prison guys, when that's just where they go to live, a lot of them go one of two ways. They go into either Islam and Christianity, or they get into straight up Satanism and witchcraft and the 48 laws of power and learning how to manipulate women. And he was talking to me about, oh, have you ever seen, those women that are like just completely devoted to a guy who's in prison for the rest of his life? Like they're never going to be with him, but they spend all their money putting it on his books and they send him care packages and they go to visit, religiously. Like, have you ever wondered about those women? And I'm like, well, not really, I guess. But, he's like, yeah, most of those guys, they're doing spells on those women inside in the prison. Like they're putting spells on those women to come see them and send them money and do those things. And it didn't dawn on me at the time that he told me that, like, that is evil. That's evil. Even from a standpoint of an actual Wiccan, that's evil. Okay? Because you're not supposed to do magic on people that like does things against their will. So again, this is something that will be relevant here as I get to this part of the story, because all of this stuff went down with him. I lost my place to live with my sister. I was staying at a friend's house and she had told me I could come live with her. And then when she got out of rehab, she came home and decided, never mind. So then I was homeless again. So I went to stay with my mom and stepdad in their RV. They were doing the snow bunny thing where they'd leave and go to Arizona and New Mexico in the winters and come back to Colorado in the spring and summer. So I stayed with them for a summer, and it was getting down to the wire where they were getting ready to leave. And I was trying to get myself into this shelter. There was a domestic violence shelter in Fort Collins, a safe house. And you basically just had to call every day and see if there was a bed open. And my parents were like getting ready to leave the next day and they gave me their truck. They both had a Ford Ranger. So my mom gave me her Ford Ranger, and it was kind of like I was planning on sleeping in that thing once they were gone. And thankfully, by the grace of God, I got into that shelter on my birthday. It was on my birthday that I got into that shelter. And I got into the shelter and I got into a temporary area. So in the temporary part of the shelter, you've got 6 weeks. And there's another part of the shelter that you can apply for, and it's a special program. And there's only like 6 rooms back there, but it was a long-term place where you could stay as long as you needed to until you got on your feet and were able to get out. So I really was just desperate to get into that program. And by the grace of God, I got into that program. So what I really needed at that time was a place of safety. And that was what the safe house felt like for a while. So I got my own room back there. I had tried to keep working my job that I had at some car lot, but I was so screwed up from the PTSD. I was having these crazy crying fits where I wouldn't even like be consciously crying. I would just have tears just pouring from my face. I could not hold myself together. It was not just psychological. I could tell this was like my ex had said I needed to get help. So one day I went in and just randomly quit. I told the guy, look, I went through some really traumatic stuff a few weeks ago and I can't work. I need to go get help. So thankfully I got into this shelter and I didn't have to pay rent the whole time I was there. So I was able to focus on myself, get back into my program, get clean again, get off all the alcohol and pills, and really just focus on healing. So when I was in the shelter, I dove way back in seriously into the New Age practices. And I was actually working with a lady who was Casey's, he called her his aunt, but she was actually a cousin. She just was so much older than him that he always referred to her as Aunt Jackie throughout his life. And very sweet lady, and probably one of the perfect people to have in my life at that time, because all of Casey's family knew how he was. So when everything happened with me, none of them, they all believed me. Now, his mom didn't feel sorry for me at all. I think whatever personality disorder he has, I think he gets it from her. But looking back, I realized that his dad had actually emailed me when he and I first got together, and he was trying to subtly warn me that Casey was a pathological liar. And it didn't click in my brain until all the way after the fact. So I had reached out to Jackie. I can't remember why, but I told her what happened and she felt horrible for me and offered to do free. Oh, what did she do? Healing touch sessions. She had her whole little office. The Good Juju group is what it was called. And she did Reiki healing touch type stuff. So I started going to see her and she gave me free sessions for, oh gosh, at least a year. It was very, very sweet of her. She just felt awful for what happened. And it was through that time that I started to realize that whatever I was doing for healing wasn't necessarily protecting me, because about 6 months into being at the shelter, I had an experience where I fully believe, because Casey was into all this occult stuff too. He was way more into it than I was. He astrally projected himself into my room at the shelter. And I was wide awake because I had gotten up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I was not, I had come back to my bed. I laid in my bed, and this apparition shows up in my room, and it's him in his prison stuff. And there was no audible speaking, but I could hear him. I could feel him trying to apologize to me. I had been having these random thoughts to go visit him in prison, and I was freaking out because I'm like, those aren't my thoughts. I don't want to go visit him. So I knew he was trying to do witchcraft on me to manipulate me. At that time, I was learning about sociopaths and supply, psychic vampires. I was realizing, oh God, I'm just another person for him to use. So, this moment in the shelter was horrific for me because here I was in this room behind 6 foot thick walls and 5 security doors. You can't get into this place physically where I am, and I'm not safe from this guy. I can't escape this person. He can psychically attack me. So it felt very disempowering. It was a very hopeless feeling that no matter what, he could still violate my space and my privacy. So I still, it wasn't clicking. So I continued. I dove further into the Reiki healing. I dove further into learning about channeling. I started using a lot of the crystals I had. My mom and my stepdad were rock hounds. I'm a rock hound. We've dug up rocks our whole lives, and they found this spot up in Colorado. It was just this cache of endless, beautiful crystals. I mean, we've been getting crystals out of there for going on 10 years now. But I started using those crystals in my meditations and channeling. My best friend was starting to really get herself into actual work with crystal resonance therapy and similar forms of Reiki. So I was diving deeper into those beliefs and practices. Do you have any questions? Should I stop real quick and see if there's any?
I'm really enjoying your story. Thank you so much.
So I stayed in the shelter for a while. I think I was in there for almost a year. And through Jackie, actually, this was okay. So I want to tell the story about the first prayer that I ever had that was answered. Because up until this point, I really was doing kind of the NA type prayer, praying to a higher power. I think NA was this thing that kind of softened me up to the idea of a higher power and prayer and forgiveness.
Probably is.
So,
It probably is for many people.
yes. So, even though they can be very militant once you actually become a Christian in NA, it was actually, hey, they say it's not a religious program, but it definitely led me to my true religion in a roundabout way. So let me see, where am I at? Okay, so for that whole year that I was living in the shelter, I'd be driving around Fort Collins, and I would have this little. I never said it as a real prayer to God. I didn't say the word God. I would call it divine source or the universe. But I would drive around and I would see people with campers sitting in their backyards collecting dust. They never take them out. They never go camping in them. They're just sitting in their backyards. And I would just think, gosh, man, if someone could just donate me a little camper, I've got a truck. I can go park this somewhere. I can park it in the trailer park at the north side of town. Like I could have a little house that nobody could take away from me. Because for my whole 20s, I always lived with really unstable people who would like throw me out randomly for no reason because they had their own issues. So I really needed something that was my own at that point that no one could say, get out. You just got to leave. I lived in boxes for so many years. I would move into a place and not really unpack because I always felt like I needed to be able to throw my stuff in my truck and drive away just in case. So I had been driving around having this thought in my head for a long time. And I went to do a session with Jackie, and she told me that her sister-in-law, I think it was, in Wyoming, which is where I live now, had a camper sitting in her field for like 20 years. They were doing nothing with his old vintage Terry Coach camper, and would I like to have it? And I was like, yeah. I had never told Jackie anything, never said anything about that to her. It's just this little quiet prayer I had, a wish, really. And so I ended up inheriting this little Terry Coach camper that I was able to get a spot in the trailer park on the north side of town with a lot rent that I could afford, with the part-time work that I did, and got out of the shelter into my own camper. And the way that the timing worked out was that my stepdad was able to go get that camper for me from the storage place on my birthday. So a year prior, I spent my birthday in that shelter. And then one whole year later, I had my camper, and I had my camper to spend my first night in my camper. So my stepdad and my brother helped me get the camper into the spot, and we cleaned it out because it had like 20 years of dust in it, and got it all set up for me to sleep in there that night. And they packed up and left. And I sat in the camper and laid on the floor and hugged the floor. And for the first time in my whole life, I thanked God. I said, thank you, God, not divine source, not the universe. Like it was the first time I had recognized a prayer had been answered. So that was like the little
I have
seed.
goosebumps everywhere.
Yeah, that was the little seed. Now, I want to clarify that a couple of years leading up to all this, through my time in NA, there was a seeker-friendly church that a lot of us NA people like to go to called Vineyard, because they didn't talk about sin. They weren't really preaching much from the Bible. It was good music and free coffee and a place to socialize with my friends. And sometimes it was a place where I would go and trauma dump on the Christians and let them pray for me, because I thought, oh, energy is energy, and but there would be times that I would be sitting in those church services, and I would hear this little voice in the very back of my mind, a still small voice that would say, you're being called to Christ. And I would chuckle at that voice. I'd be like, where did that thought come from? Like, get out of here. That's ridiculous. I know so much more than these Christians. I'm so much more enlightened than them. Why would I ever be called to Christ? So that had been going on for a couple of years. And then I had this experience where I thanked God for the first time ever. And then a couple of weeks after that, I was feeling this strong urge during my prayers, because by that point in time, I was doing daily prayers, but I was praying to archangels. Okay. And I don't know how many of these were actually biblical angels and how many of them are just in because the New Age likes to appropriate a lot of biblical language and biblical characters. And that's one of the things that they do, is they pray to the archangel. So for about 2 weeks, I was feeling this urge during my prayers to pray to Jesus Christ, call on Jesus Christ. And I was laughing at that thought. I'm like, why would I'm not going to call on Jesus Christ. He's just ascended master. I didn't disrespect him, but I don't need to call on him in prayer. Like he doesn't rank high enough. So I'm having those thoughts for like 2 weeks during my prayers. So I go over to my best friend's house for a crystal resonance session. And she calls in Mother Mary during this session. Okay. So this is just another thing that's like warming. I think this was warming me up to biblical words, not even concepts, but biblical words and names, and making me more comfortable with the idea. So I did this session with her, and she sent me home with this little list of, take the salt bath and do the sage and blah, blah, blah. So I come home, and I was actually staying at my parents. My parents were in the same trailer park as me, but their RV was parked there. So I was at their RV watching it while they were out somewhere on a trip somewhere, watching their dogs and having a break because the RV was like a land yacht compared to my little Terry coach. So I'm like, yeah, I'm in the mansion. I just got this residence session done. We called in Mother Mary. I'm going to go home and do all this self-care and cleanse myself and all this stuff. So I go back to the RV and I take my salt bath and I get the sage out. And my mom, being the weird half Cath that she was, had this Virgin of Guadalupe statue in her RV. So I'm like saging around the statue and, do all my little ritual and get ready for bed and lay down in bed. And I start to say my evening prayers. And I pray to this, and I call in this archangel. I call in this archangel. And I heard that voice of call on Jesus Christ, call on Jesus Christ. And so at that point, I kind of was like, okay, why not? I'll call on Jesus Christ. So the moment I said his name, I said, and I call on Jesus Christ, the Spirit dropped on me. I didn't know that's what was happening at the time. I didn't know the terminology for this. Up until this point, I left out a really important part. Up until this point, I had been doing these channelings where I was calling in what I now know are demons. But at the time that I was calling them in, I didn't understand they were unclean spirits. I thought they were angels. So I would invite these entities into my body, and there was this strange fight of will. I didn't understand any of that at the time. But these entities would approach, and I would feel this blackness, this dark fear, evil, every kind of dark feeling you can think. That's the sensation that I would feel when these entities would first come upon me. And then there would be this battle of will, because you have to give them permission to come inside your body, at least with the channeling kind of stuff I was doing. And I didn't quite know that language. It just felt like this weird resistance where I wanted to resist this dark, evil, dirty. It felt unclean. I didn't know the word then, but I always felt like I needed a shower after these sessions. But after I would have that battle of wills with them and I would give over my will and let them enter me, it was full on euphoria. It was like the most amazing drug you could ever take. And the things that I would see and the messages that they would give me were amazing. And it all was confirmation for me at the time that, oh, this is all so true. But I didn't recognize that what I felt when they would first come upon me was pure evil. Oh, awful. But they would make me forget about it as soon as they were in my body, because I felt euphoria. But the night that I called on Jesus, when his spirit came, there was no evil, there was no darkness. It was the most beautiful, loving. I felt like I was in a river of love and compassion. I can't put words to it. I felt the most amazing sensation of love and comfort. And I didn't have to fight my will. He wasn't trying to overcome my will. He was just revealing himself to me. And I knew it was Jesus. It was Jesus Christ. Like, I had this knowing, and I had never believed it in my whole life. Even when I talked about him being an ascended master, I still had all of the beliefs that, oh, he possibly never existed, or he really went to India and became a Buddhist teacher there. And, I had all those crazy beliefs about him. But when his spirit came to me, I knew exactly who he was. And then not only did he reveal himself to me, he revealed the Father. And that was like a whole nother mind-blowing thing, because I not only definitely never believed in Jesus Christ, and definitely never believed in God the Father, never even knew there was a difference, never knew there was a distinction. I never cared. always rejected the scriptures vehemently, belligerently. And he came upon me that night and dropped his spirit into me. And I'm going to tell part of the story that I've always been afraid to tell because I was worried that people would judge me. But I'm kind of at the point in my walk where I want people to start understanding that God will absolutely meet you where you're at if your heart is willing. And if you're willing to answer him, he will take you on baby steps, no matter how little you understand. Because that night, I still was completely engulfed in New Age belief. I had a lifetime of believing in reincarnation and no understanding of salvation or life after death, nothing like that. So I had a lot of unlearning to do, and I had no one around who understood that I had just been given the gift of the Spirit and then I needed to be discipled. So I was still on my own after this experience. So that night, I never would have picked up a Bible. And God knew that. But he knew that I wasn't afraid of Gnostic books. So he guided me to what I believe is the least offensive of all the books. And that's why I believe he felt it was safe to take me to that one, which is the Gospel of Thomas. And the Gospel of Thomas is basically just plagiarized verses from the synoptic gospels. So I was reading through a lot of these parables are actually in the real gospel. So I was reading through them and felt an understanding of them that I hadn't felt before. And it was like opening my mind to, oh, like Christ can guide me. He can unlock this wisdom and knowledge for me. So for the first few months that I had received the Spirit, I was not a Christian. I didn't know that I was being called to be a Christian. I thought I was having this experience with Christ, like initiating me maybe into some kind of, level of, healing that I'm going to be doing for people. And, I didn't know. So I was trying. But I was on fire for him and I wanted to know him and I wanted to understand him better than I had tried to before, which is not. So what do? I order a Gnostic Bible instead of ordering a Bible because I had that programming in me where I was like, oh, well, the truth is not going to be in that book. If I want to learn about Jesus, I need to go read the books that they banned, all the stuff they don't want you to know about Jesus. So, and I was still doing crystal resonance therapy sessions with my best friend. Her and I were still going up. We were going up to the Buddhist temple and doing these rituals up at the temple where she was working Reiki on me. And I was like asking her to like call in biblical prophets, like, ooh, call in Elijah and call in so-and-so. And I just saying names I just knew from scripture. I didn't know who they were. I didn't know anything about the book. But I was doing all that. And I'll never forget when we were riding up to the temple for the last time. And I started telling her, I think I'm being called into Christianity. And she was like, that is not where I'm being called. Because I got that Gnostic Bible and thankfully I had the Spirit in me at that point. So I started reading it and it wasn't sitting right. It was like, I'm not learning about him in
It was
here.
still your bridge, right? Because you probably wouldn't have gone
Yes.
straight to the real Bible immediately.
No.
You just needed to be able to see with your own eyes and
Yes.
feel that this is off,
Yeah.
and okay, fine, I'll go check that out instead.
That's exactly how it went. And it wasn't even at that point, I didn't think, okay, let me go read the Bible. I was working at this little coffee shop in a bus depot, and there was a little free library that we had. And I walked into work one day, and I had forgotten to bring the book with me that I was reading. And I looked on the shelf, and there was a King Jimmy. And I'm like, hey, you know what? I've been trying to find out about this Jesus guy. I feel like he really changed something in me, and I just I need to learn about him because that night that I experienced that river of compassion, I feel like I know he reached into my soul and he like untied a knot that was at the core of my soul from the time I was a child. All the things I was trying to heal on all the Reiki and the crystal resonance therapy and all that stuff I was doing trying to heal myself, he healed wounds in me in that moment, that just the moment that I met him, not even through the night, like the moment I met him and he gave me the Spirit, something in me was fixed. So I went in to work that day and saw that King James and was like, I got nothing else to read. It's a slow day. I'm going to start reading the Bible. So I pulled it up and I started on page 1 because I, had other people who were like, oh, you should read the book of John. And it was like, no, I want to start on page 1. I want to understand this. And I'll never forget getting to Exodus and having my mind just be blown, because I was one of those people that walked around for years slandering Yahweh as this evil tyrant. And look at this mean, horrible stuff he did to the Egyptians. And he's such a big meanie. And then I'm reading it. I'm like, oh my God, look what these Egyptians are doing to his people. And like, oh, look how they're directly defying him. Oh, and look how, he's given them an opportunity to stop the plagues and let his people go. And they let him go and they go get him back. And like, I was realizing the justice, the righteousness, the consequences of sin. It was all clicking. And so I knew, honestly, after the first page of Genesis, I knew, oh my God, this is the truth. This sits right with my spirit. This makes sense. So I started reading the Bible.
That's amazing that if that was your first go at the Bible that you actually understood what was happening. That is being spirit filled. I know in my own experience, I couldn't even make sense of the NIV when I was trying to read it. It took a
Yeah.
long time before I could understand King James. Certainly not the first time I tried picking it up. I had no idea what was going on.
No, he definitely gave me a clarity that, now there was still a lot of confusion. I started going to, because at first I'll never forget the moment I stopped believing in reincarnation. I had been reading the Bible for a few days and I was sitting in my camper, chilling with my dog and thinking about, reincarnation and how does this square with, what the Bible says. And because at that time I thought heaven, I didn't know Sheol and resurrection, but it started to dawn on me that a loving creator, a loving, merciful, kind creator would never make a system of reincarnation. Reincarnation is actually
Sure. It's actually,
horribly,
yeah, it's
horribly unjust.
very,
Off. And the more you learn about karma, because people think karma is like this surface level easy. Oh, you do bad is done to you. No, man, karma gets into this weird law of attraction type thing, where then you add on all your past lives, and your life might suck right now, not because of anything you've done in this life, but 4 lifetimes ago, you've got karma that you're still paying for. You're paying karmic debt from 1,000 lifetimes ago, and you need to do past life regression to find out what you did and how to fix that karmically and all that. Like, it gets really cruel. This endless cycle of death and rebirth. There's no end to it. And the only possible end is if you possibly reach nirvana, which like nobody can do. So I had that moment where I was like, oh my gosh, reincarnation doesn't make any sense. I also had the horrible realization that abortion is murder, because I had an abortion when I was in my early 20s and I honestly never felt bad about it. I never gave it a second thought. But I had that moment where I was sitting and realized, oh my God, I'm a murderer. And I brought it to God and was like, oh my God, forgive me. I was completely brainwashed into the feminist. That's just a clump of cells. And here's your list of excuses for why.
that was you and your Bible in your camper. So I don't know where your story is going to go from here, but this was not you in a church being told what the Bible said. So from the get-go, you were reading it with your own eyes. You had the Holy Spirit helping you understand it, and you didn't, did you ever have to unlearn? Did you then start learning church stuff that you then backed up, or
I had been reading my Bible at home myself the whole time I started going to a little non-denominational church. And so I was realizing quite quickly that I would go to the Bible study before church service. And I was getting excited about, oh, look at this Nephilim stuff. And, I was like, want to talk about Genesis 6. And, I'm in this was a tiny little Church of Christ, non-denominational. There's like 40 members of this church. Marty, the pastor, had been friends with my mom and my late stepfather years before I became a Christian. And a very sweet guy. He actually baptized me. That was another thing that I found disturbing when I became a Christian. Another thing with the Spirit, I started feeling this overwhelming urge to get baptized, which again, I I had been baptized when I was 7, didn't know anything about it, didn't make any sense to me. But once I became a Christian, I like felt like I needed to go do that outward symbol. And I was still going to the Vineyard church at that point, and this was just such a huge church. I went and tried to talk to somebody. I wanted to tell someone my testimony. I was so excited. I thought I was joining this new family of all these loving people that were just going to welcome me with open arms and be so excited that a sinner has repented. And I was in for a rude awakening with that. But I went over to the secretary for the church and was like, hey, I really feel the urgency to get baptized. And she was like, oh, okay. Give me your email. We do mass baptisms every 3 months. We'll let you know, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait a minute. I haven't gotten to the book of Acts yet, but I was familiar with the story of, was it the Ethiopian? And who
Great.
baptized him? Was it Paul that baptized him?
Oh, I
One of
can't.
the apostles, found out, you haven't been baptized yet? Oh,
Right? You're
yeah, I
ready.
was like,
Let's do it. There's no waiting. Let's go.
yeah, what's stopping us? Let's go right now. So I felt that sense of urgency, and this church was like, had so many people it's discipling. It's like, oh, we do mass baptisms. No, I wanted my own special baptism. I don't want to get baptized with a whole bunch of other people I don't know. This is so, you guys don't understand how special this is for me. You don't understand what a big deal this is. Like, for God to get me, that's a huge deal. I need my own baptism. So it's like, thankfully, I had that urgency. And so I knew Marty. I contacted him. I was like, hey, will you baptize me? I really feel like I need to get this done. I had a fear of, if I get hit by a bus, and I didn't know back then, that I still would have gone to the right side of Sheol if I hadn't been baptized. But I had this feeling of, I really need to get this done. So I had been baptized at that church. And so that's when I decided to start going to his, because that seeker friendly church was just not intimate enough for me. But then I started going to the small church, and nobody really wanted to get into the deep stuff. We would read our little thing for Bible study, and then the guy would put that down, and then he'd reach over and pick up the commentary and start reading from the commentary and tell us what we're supposed to think about what we just read. So I was going to that little church and just reading my Bible at home. And one of the first things that I noticed was being taught differently was the Sabbath. I got to the point in the scriptures about keeping the Sabbath and was like, well, that seems pretty clear. I started to realize that I needed a path. I needed an instruction manual for life, because I had been doing things my own darn way my whole life, and it got me nothing but trauma and, spiritual darkness and, letting wicked, unclean spirits into my soul, to channel messages through me. Like, it got me into dark places. So I was just so devoted. I was so in love with God for saving me and healing that spiritual blindness, removing those scales from my eyes, that I was willing to do anything he said. And I didn't care what people at church said. I didn't care what theologians or pastors believed. Like, I felt like if I'm reading it in this book and it's clearly telling me to do a certain thing, I'm going to do it, because he knows better than I do. He's shown me. He gave me 20 some years of my life to show him doing things my way. And then he came along and showed me his ways are better. So I started feeling a conviction to keep the Sabbath. And then I also came across the clean and unclean animals in Leviticus 11. And I had a conversation with him because it didn't make sense to me at first. I was like, why these animals? It seems so random and arbitrary. But I had this little conversation with him in my head where I was like, God, if you can explain to me why these animals are why this is unclean, I've got no problem cutting that stuff out of my diet if I can just kind of understand. And it was like he downloaded the understanding into my brain in that moment. It was like, these are trash compactors. These animals were created to be the cleanup crew. They were not created to be on the menu. They are yucky. They're literally unclean. And it was in that moment, I had this switch where basically any craving I had for pork was like gone. The only thing I ever struggled with, still craving occasionally, is crab legs. Like other than that, shrimp, lobster, pork. That was really the unclean meats that I ate. I can't think of any. I mean, I never ate any like exotic alligator.
Have a craving for a crow or a dog?
No, never. I did eat ostrich once, which was weird because it was like a red meat. It was not like poultry,
I
but
know that
never.
that one surprised me when I found that one in the Bible. It did surprise me because it's a little bit less obvious than a crow that you picture.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I started having these changes, and I didn't start feeling like the people at church like were bad people or anything. It just started to become kind of like a spiritual desert for me. Like I just wasn't being fed at church on Sundays anymore. Like I was keeping Sabbath. I had gone through this another negotiation with the father. When I first started figuring out the Sabbath, I was like, well, there's people saying that this stuff changed, but I feel like I'm reading in your book. I don't see anywhere where it says that it changed. So Lord, if the Sabbath didn't change and you want me to keep it, please help me find a job that will allow me to keep the Sabbath, because I was going through a transition at that point in my life where the coffee shop at the bus station was getting shut down. And I had been doing the other job I was doing was construction cleaning with a gal. And I was just getting burnt out on that. The hours with that were just so early in the morning, and it was just becoming too much. And so I had this little idea to go get a Christian business directory from a local gas station and look for Christian owned businesses, because I felt I would have a better chance of finding someone who might be more respectful of my beliefs if they were also Christian. And that was the case. I lucked out, or I was blessed, I should say. And there was this jewelry manufacturing place, this guy named Dave Clack in Fort Collins. He's a photographer and an artist, and he makes jewelry, and he does this really cool, he prints his photography onto, at first it was like different kinds of paper that we use, but then he moved into metal. But he had a gallery in Old Town, and he had a production facility. So typically when they hired people, they had to be available for weekends because they would also want you to work the gallery, but they were just looking for someone for the production. So when I said, hey, I'm feeling like I want I want to keep the Sabbaths, and I'm also going to I was realizing his feasts hadn't been done away with either. And, I'm going to need extra days for these feast days, and these would be religious observances. And would you guys be okay with that? And his wife, who had interviewed me, a sweet lady, oh yeah, that'd be totally fine. We can just get you in 9 to 5, Monday through Friday at the production facility, and that's great. And you just tell us ahead of time when you need your holy days off. And it was wonderful. And I worked there for a good 4 years. And, there was a lot of growing pains at that place. Dave was not built to be a manager. He wasn't built to run a team. It was a hard place to work for a while in terms of emotional abuse, basically.
It was
But
it was steady, right? And
it
from
was steady work, and they
yeah.
were Christians. And I would pray with them. We would do employee evaluations, and we would pray together. And I could tell them about some serious things going on in my life and share things with them. And despite the rocky road that we had building our work relationship, it actually was a blessing. And there was a time, because there was a time where I put in my notice, was like, I'm quitting, I'm getting out of here. And Dave called me in the next day and was like, what can we do to get you to stay? And I'm like, well, do you want to know the truth? Because I'm going to tell you. It's like, yes. And so by the time I left that place, I'm like giving Dave a big old hug, and we were like, we were fellow Christians. It was a very wonderful place for me to be at that time in my life. And they respected my religious observances, and God was just confirming one thing after another for me. He's
And
like,
but that on its own is a miracle too, right? Because not all of us have had that experience with Christians who don't believe in keeping the
absolutely.
or that Saturday is the Sabbath. So
Yeah,
it's actually incredible. I think sometimes your chances of being able to take those holidays off are greater if you're working for atheists than for Christians in
interesting.
So
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, that wasn't my experience. They were very, they understood there's a whole bunch of different denominations. They know there's Christians who keep the Sabbath.
It didn't phase them. That's incredible.
Yeah, they didn't know that there were Christians who keep the feasts, but they learned that from me, and they're like, oh, that is so interesting. They were very, very wonderful, very nice Christian brother and sister in the Lord. So yeah, so I started keeping the Sabbath. I stopped going to the Sunday church just more because I didn't want to argue with people. I was tempted to like bring up things and, wanted to correct. And I at least had the wisdom to know I didn't need to be correcting people. Like I needed to just kind of, all right, well, this is just going to be my walk. And then that's how I kind of got into the online community because of course I was able to find people who were doing Sabbath live streams. Rob Skiba, this was way back when it was still Rob and John Hall, and it was just them before Now You See TV, before all of it was just Rob's virtual house church, and they would read the Torah portions on Sabbath, and I'd get up and I'd listen to my little stream and have my little Sabbath day, take my dogs for a walk. I eventually ended up getting as a result of everything that happened with Casey, I guess this is a part of my testimony. I should share about Sean because after my experience with Casey, I had completely sworn off men. I was like totally done. I was traumatized, broken. I was scared, terrified of men. I did end up meeting a guy in a tool group. That used to be my religion, okay? New age stuff aside, the band Tool,
Oh, I was
I
thinking
like
of like drills and screwdrivers.
now
Okay, yeah.
Tool the band, okay? I was obsessed with them. Music was a huge part of my life. That was I didn't realize how much music dictated my emotions, but Tool was like this band that I just had on a pedestal. This actually is artwork from one of their guitars and one of their albums. Um, I met a guy through a Tool group who lived in Chicago, and he was actually a very nice guy. And we ended up chatting, and we ended up doing an online type relationship. And I visited him in Chicago, and he visited me in Colorado. And I had plans to move to Chicago. Actually, he was a very nice guy. To this day, I really hope that a good lady came into his life because he really deserves it. And he did something for me that I couldn't do for myself because I became a Christian while we were in this long distance relationship. And things changed. Like the dynamic of our relationship changed, and he got kind of weird and uncomfortable. And I didn't try to preach to him or anything. I was not one of the I knew too much as a former new ager that, man, talking to people who don't believe this, who don't have the spirit, it's a very, pick your battles, like if they're inviting you to have a conversation, have it. But man, like just preaching the gospel at them, never did anything for me. So I never pushed on him, but things definitely, dynamic changed, the vibe changed. And there was a day where he brought up, this just isn't quite feeling right. And he didn't use the words unequally yoked, but he was saying we were unequally yoked. And I knew we were unequally yoked based on scripture, but I also had been reading through, I think it's in Corinthians where it talks about the unbelieving spouse. Now we weren't married, but I had settled on him. I wasn't planning on dating any other guys. He's a very nice guy. He wanted the traditional gender roles. I was falling more into being comfortable with that idea, and but he ended up breaking up with me because we were unequally yoked. He's like, this isn't gonna work.
That's a blessing, right? Because you were
Total
somebody who
absolute blessing.
I'm
Yes.
eagerly waiting to hear where Sean was at that time, but I'm under the impression he was on the path before you, and then he
Oh yeah.
along
Long before me.
ideal, right? Like you don't. I mean, I wouldn't have wanted to. I would have not wanted to teach a husband or a boyfriend or anything
Mm-mm.
like that.
No, no. And I didn't know that at the time. I didn't understand at the time. I was trying to honor the principle of no, you don't leave the unbelieving spouse, that's okay. And so I was trying to have that kind of heart towards him.
That was probably the, in some ways that was the correct thing, maybe, but it's a blessing that he let you go so that you could have the
He
life you.
did. Yeah, he knew. And I knew deep down, I just didn't want to accept it, because he was such a nice guy. And I really, I felt like, no, I found a good guy. I don't want to I finally was gonna have the nice guy, the nice guy never gets the gal. And I was like, I need a nice guy, a non-threatening, nice guy. And he was the epitome of that. But I couldn't listen to Tool for a couple of years after I came to
Yeah,
Christ.
it's dark. Tools kind of as dark as it gets.
And
I
there and I would say
there's these morphing kind of, what is that one? Oh, it's very dark. Tools like, anyway, I used to like them a lot too, but you could not pay me to listen.
there he Maynard has an elevated kind of ability to insert beliefs into his music that are truly brainwashing people. And I mean, the irony hit me when I became a believer of walking around with a shirt on that says Tool, and like what a tool you become for the, and even he like admitting I'm a tool for the industry. And he says in his songs, I sold my soul to make a record, and you bought one. It's like, so I'll never forget when he came out with his memoirs, and he's on the front of the cover with his hand in it, his hidden hand right on the cover of his book. I'm like, oh my gosh. So yeah, so we, what that thing we had in common, Tool, was not a commonality anymore. And bless his heart, he did for me what I couldn't do for myself. And I was sad at first. I was planning, but thank God I was planning to move all the way to Chicago. Ugh, I never want to go back to the Midwest. I never want to be in the overcast cut type of environment again. I don't. I got away from Ohio, and I'm glad my parents moved me away from there, because I have become a mountain girl. I really need scenery. I really need wide open spaces. I need mountains and rocks to dig for, and it's just not happening in Chicago. So thankfully I didn't move out there, but it was it was shortly after that, I think, that I started noticing Sean in these Torah groups. And I didn't have those kind of, it was not on my radar. Romance relationships was not, I was, after Mike, the guy in Chicago, I was like, I'm done. Because also I was realizing that I was falling into these a niche of a niche of a niche. I would get more and more niche with everything I learned. So first I become a Christian, then I become a Torah keeping Christian, then I become a flat earth Christian. And once I realized the shape of the earth, I was like, oh, I'm never going to find a man. I'm getting a second dog. I'm getting a big dog who'll be my guard dog. And I'm good. I will be a celibate spinster for the rest of my life. I'm
Very, very similar reflection. I said, if you're going to give me anyone, let him be a Torah keeping flat earther.
See, I didn't even have the prayer in my head for God to bring me a man. I was like, I don't want one. I don't need one. You know, I might need one when I need to carry this lawnmower out of the back of my truck that I just bought from Home Depot. But other than that, I don't need a man. I might need one to help me open this jar of pickles. But other than that, I do not need a man. So I was totally in that mindset. And I had advertisements all over my Facebook of no PMs. I made posts because as I got more into the Torah crowd, I did have guys sliding into my DMs to try and chat me up. And I just started putting out the disclaimers that, look, I'm not on here to meet guys or find love. Like, I'm on here to, it's funny because I feel like God started nudging me to start building my Facebook page in a different way at that time that I didn't understand, which I do now because of how I'm able to use Facebook to plant seeds and share with people things that edify them, and get my own edification from things reflecting back to me that I've shared with others. It's like, oh, you're going through that too, and all this confirmation. He's just built so much with my Facebook. But that back then I didn't really understand what he was doing, but I knew that I wasn't on Facebook to like air my dirty laundry or complain about my life or all the things that I used to do on Facebook. I'm like, I'm on here with a purpose. I'm sharing scripture. I'm sharing funny memes. I'm bringing levity, bringing humor to people's lives.
Things that I noticed, the things that when we started this interview, that exactly what you're naming is exactly what that's what comes through on your page. Exactly
Yeah.
that.
That's what, at the time I had no idea because I didn't have followers. I didn't have a whole big friends list. In fact, I had a whole bunch of people on my friends list from the Tool group and from my former New Age life who were like so angry at me because now I'm like posting scripture all of a sudden. My best friend completely disowned me. I mean, that was devastating. To this day, Katie, to this day, I pray for her every day. And yes, I stalk her page. I'm always looking at her page because I'm like, one of these days, Lord, one of these days, I'm going to see that post. Like, I'm going to see the words, that she had some kind of experience and she's questioning things, like, I'm going to be ready to disciple her because if he can get me, he can get her. But yeah, I love